Hello, whisperers. Welcome to the channel. If you enjoy tonight's tale, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. It helps more than you know. Now, dim the lights, and let's begin tonight's story. I had been doing this for 3 years when I realized the digs weren't random. The sheriff blamed drug addicts. Jewelry, he said, standing in the rain with his hands buried in his jacket pockets, staring at the 7th disturbed grave that month. Wedding rings, gold teeth, whatever they think they can hawk. That was his explanation, and I let him have it. Easier that way. But I've been burying people long enough to know how dirt moves. Grave robbers dig down. They leave messy, uneven holes, panic tunnels from the surface. What I was seeing was different. The coffins weren't torn from above. They were broken from the inside. The earth around them had bulged up, split like something had shoved its way out. I found the first real clue on a Tuesday. Snow coming down in slow, fat flakes. A fresh grave. Roland Pritchett, buried 4 days earlier, had its mound disturbed. Not scattered, shifted. The dirt looked pressed aside, like something had risen under it. Between the headstones, I found a trail, smeared earth in a thin, uneven line, wet with something darker than meltwater, leading toward the overgrown fence line. I followed it maybe 50 yards before it vanished into the older plots. That's when I heard it for the first time. Around 1 a.m., while checking the locks on the maintenance shed, a rustling cut through the wind, steady, rhythmic, fabric on dirt. I aimed my flashlight and it stopped. Then came another sound, wet, quick, almost hungry. I didn't go looking. The next morning, I found what was left of Roland Pritchett lying half out of his grave. Not all of him, just enough. The casket was split, the body half dragged into the open. His jaw was gone, not broken, gone. Nothing left but a hanging strip of soft palate like an empty hinge. His hands were shredded. The fingernails had been ripped clean off. Scratches covered his face and neck, as if he'd fought something with claws that couldn't quite hold him. I stood there a long time, breathing through my mouth because the smell was wrong. Copper, rot, and something sour underneath. Something animal. The sheriff showed up again, pale beneath his hat. "Animal scavenging," he said finally. "Pack of dogs got into the grave after the burial was compromised." "From the inside out?" I asked. He didn't answer, just told me to rebury the body and quit talking. That night, I stayed late, parked my truck behind the shed and sat in the dark with the thermos that went cold an hour in. I kept the flashlight off, just waited, letting the cemetery settle into that kind of silence that only exists at 2 a.m. in a place full of the dead. At 2:47, I heard it again. Not just rustling this time, a deeper sound, earth being pushed aside. Then another, then 3 more, all around me, like the ground itself was breathing. Then the scratching started, soft, deliberate, the drag of fingernails on wood, and then I saw it. Between the rows of graves, something pale rose from the ground, like a hand coming up through water. But it wasn't a hand. It was a back, a pair of shoulders, then a head. The thing moved slow, careful, working itself out of the dirt like it had been lying there, waiting for the right moment to push free. In the faint moonlight, just a thin sliver left. I saw its skin, gray-white, almost translucent, caked in wet soil that clung like paint. It crawled on all fours at first, then crouched upright, head tilted like it was listening. It looked human. That was the worst part. Human enough that my brain almost accepted it before instinct yanked the alarm. It moved toward a fresh grave, Sarah Merchaud, buried 2 days ago, and began to dig. Not with tools, with its hands. The nails scraped and tore the dirt with practiced ease. More shapes broke the surface around it. 3, maybe 4. I couldn't count. They moved in unison, methodical, like a crew that had done this 100 times. No growls, no chatter, just the steady rhythm of soil shifting, wood splintering, and the wet sounds of feeding. I didn't move, couldn't. I sat in the dark of the shed, watching through the cracked door as they tore open Sarah Merchaud's casket like cardboard, feeding with a patience that felt almost respectful. When they were done, when nothing was left but splinters and dirt, they slipped back underground one by one. The last one paused, turned toward me. Even through that darkness, I felt it notice me. A pressure behind my ribs, heavy as a hand. Then it sank beneath the soil, and the night went still. I didn't leave the shed until sunrise. The sheriff and my supervisor didn't want to hear it. I told them anyway. Something's living in the graves, I said. Something that eats the bodies. My supervisor, Morrison, a man who'd never spent a full night out here in his life, actually laughed. "You've been working nights too long, Dale. You're seeing things." The sheriff didn't laugh. He just looked at me for a long moment and said quietly, "Stop talking about this. You want to keep your job? You stop talking about this." So I did. I kept my mouth shut. I kept burying what was left, and I kept watching. Things got worse after that. The disturbances became more frequent, every few nights at first, then almost nightly. It wasn't random anymore. I started noticing patterns. The things avoided the old graves, the ones sealed and settled deep. They went after the fresh ones, the bodies still soft, still new, the recently dead, the newly vulnerable. And then I realized something else. They only came when the moon was dark. On full moons, the cemetery stayed quiet. But during the new moon, when the night went pitch black, the ground would stir. The earth itself seemed to breathe. By the 14th night, I'd stopped pretending it wasn't real, and I did something stupid. I decided to dig one up. The grave belonged to a woman named Evelyn Cross, buried 28 days earlier, according to the logbook. When I put my shovel through the coffin lid, what I found shouldn't have existed. The coffin was half filled with damp earth, and in that dirt, curled like a child, was one of them. Its skin had taken on the color of the soil, grayish-brown, veins faintly visible under the surface. Its chest rose and fell in a slow, careful rhythm. Its eyes were closed, but I could see movement under the lids. REM sleep. It was dreaming. I stared for a long time, too long. I should have been terrified. Instead, I felt something else. Anger. These weren't demons. They weren't supernatural. They were animals. Intelligent, organized, perfectly evolved to nest in graves and feed on the dead. Animals can be killed. I went back to the shed and grabbed the gasoline can. My hands were shaking, but I told myself I was just finishing the job no one else would do. I poured the gas over the thing's sleeping body until the fumes burned my nose and eyes. I was reaching for the matches when I heard it, a sound like the earth screaming. The ground around me burst open, not metaphorically, literally. Dozens of hands clawed up from the soil. Pale bodies surged out of the ground in waves, their movements too smooth, too coordinated. The one I'd drenched in gasoline woke up mid-breath. Its eyes opened, cloudy white, pupils dilating as it locked on me, and it screamed. The sound wasn't human. It was raw, ancient, and furious. Like the soil itself was alive and angry I'd touched one of its own. The others came for me, not running, but gliding, flowing across the ground like water, every muscle in my body screaming, "Run." So I did. I sprinted for my truck, heart hammering, boots slipping on mud. I slammed the door and hit the lock just as the first one reached me, its face pressed against the window. Gray skin, milky eyes, a mouth full of sharp, narrow teeth, every one of them intact, every one of them wrong. It didn't try to break the glass. It just watched me. They all did, surrounding the truck in perfect silence, heads tilted at the same angle, studying me like I was the experiment and they were the scientists. Then, slowly, they sank back into the earth, one by one, like nothing had ever happened. I sat there until dawn, shaking, staring at the graves where they'd vanished. 3 days later, I finally worked up the courage to go back. The grave I'd desecrated was perfect again. Refilled, leveled, flowers on top. No sign of the gasoline. No broken lid. No tracks. Nothing. It was as if the ground had healed itself. The cemetery was still. Too still. No rustling under the soil. No wind strong enough to move the flowers. Just the steady hum of the highway in the distance and the creak of the old oak limbs swaying over the headstones. By midnight, I almost believed it was over. That's when I noticed them. 3 new graves, fresh mounds of dark earth lined up near the rear fence, perfectly spaced, perfectly even. No headstones, no markers, no flowers, just raw dirt. I knew every burial scheduled that month. These weren't on the list. I grabbed a shovel and went to the nearest one. The ground was soft, freshly packed, too soft for something that was supposed to have settled. After maybe 2 feet of digging, my shovel hit wood. I brushed away the loose soil and lifted the lid. Inside were 3 of them, stacked like cordwood in a single casket. The one on top was gray and half decayed, skin slipping from the muscle beneath. Its jaw hung open, slack and heavy, like it had been dead for weeks, but that wasn't possible. I'd seen them alive, moving, feeding. These weren't corpses. They were in between, hibernating or rotting, I couldn't tell. They'd buried themselves. Somehow they'd gotten a coffin and used the cemetery's own tools to dig their way down. I stood there, shovel in hand, trying to make sense of it. And that's when I heard the sound, a low vibration, deep enough to feel in my ribs. It came from the far side of the cemetery, where the oldest graves sat in uneven rows. It grew louder until the soil beneath my boots started to tremble. Then the ground began to move, not in one place, everywhere. The entire cemetery rippled like water disturbed by wind. Headstones tilted, flowers slid off mounds. The earth bulged upward in hundreds of small pulses, and then they started to rise. Pale shapes pushing out of the soil, crawling, stretching, shaking off the dirt. The sound of it, the dirt sliding, the slow groan of wood giving way, felt alive. It wasn't even sunset yet. The last of the daylight was still bleeding orange over the horizon. They shouldn't have been able to come up. Not this early, not in daylight, unless hunger had changed the rules, or there were so many now that it didn't matter. I ran for the truck, but I didn't make it far. They were already ahead of me, dozens of them, maybe more, rising from the ground between me and the gate, turning toward me in perfect unison. I changed direction and sprinted for the maintenance shed. Behind me, I could hear them moving, not fast but steady. That soft, dragging crawl of something patient, something that knew I had nowhere else to go. I slammed the shed door and locked it, pressed my back to it, and listened. Outside they gathered. When I finally looked through the small window, I saw them. 50, maybe 60 of them, standing in the open, shoulder to shoulder. All pale, all wrong. Their eyes caught the dying sunlight like the reflection in an animal's eye. As the last light slipped away, more surfaced. Some crawled from graves. Others clawed up from deeper below, as if they'd been sleeping farther down in hidden chambers, waiting for the right moment to rise. By full dark, the cemetery was alive, and I understood what I was really standing on. They didn't live in individual graves. The graves were just the surface. Beneath the soil, the whole cemetery was honeycombed with tunnels, interconnected chambers like an ant colony made of flesh and rot. The caskets weren't their homes. They were storage. The bodies inside, just food. Riverside Memorial wasn't a resting place. It was a farm. I watched from the shed window as they began to dig again, not toward me, but toward the 3 new graves I'd found. They worked methodically, pulling up the caskets, removing the bodies of their own kind, and dragging them back underground, deeper, maybe to whatever core chamber they came from. They worked until dawn, and when the first light touched the trees, they all stopped. Then, one by one, they melted back into the earth, leaving the surface smooth again, quiet, untouched. By the time the sun rose, the cemetery looked normal, almost. I'm writing this from my truck, parked just outside the gate. I told Morrison I was sick. I don't know how long I can keep that up before he starts asking questions. But I know this much. The feeding's over, for now. The ground's still. The silence feels patient, like it's waiting. They know about me now. They've learned what curiosity looks like, and they know it always comes back. I've been tracking the patterns, marking dates against the lunar cycle. Every 28 days, the ground moves again, always on the new moon. And once a year, during the darkest one, they do something different. They leave. I haven't seen it happen yet, but I've found the signs. Faint trails leading past the fence, claw marks on the gate, the dirt scattered outward instead of in. They're gone for one night, and then they come back. That's enough time, enough to visit other cemeteries, enough to spread. I've checked the surrounding towns. 17 cemeteries within 50 miles. 3 already show the same signs, same patterns, same feeding. This isn't one graveyard's curse. It's an infestation, and we've been feeding it for years without realizing it. No one's going to believe me. But I know what I saw. And I know what's still sleeping under the ground, waiting for the next new moon.